Jerrold Nadler.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here for the Agudath breakfast.
Good morning, John.
Because this is an organization that does so much good work, so much asset, so much ascension. I want to mention a few things briefly, and some of what I'm about to say probably will not hear elsewhere. Number one, first the economy, then I'll talk about Israel and Iran. We are reliving the 1930s. We're in a depression, the first depression that we've had since the 1930s, caused by similar effects. We had a bubble burst, we had a financial crisis. History tells us that depressions ensuing upon financial crises last generally a minimum of 8 to 10 years, which means we can expect another 6 or 7 years of very high unemployment, very high misery, lots of middle-class people becoming poor people, unless there is massive government intervention. From my point of view, President Obama wants to go in about a quarter of the way in the right direction. The Republicans want to go 180 degrees in the wrong direction in terms of curing this economy. We do not need massive spending cuts. That's the last thing we should see now. The deficit is a problem we can deal with in the longer and medium term, but first we've got to get the economy running again. First we've got to get people employed again. And every time we cut the budget, that hurts that goal. Not to mention the fact that people represented by the Agudath Israel need housing help, they need food help, they need all kinds of help of exactly the discretionary budget that we're killing. And everything that we're doing, every time you see that Congress is cutting the budget or this super committee is going to cut the budget, it's going to cut everything that all the Jewish organizations that help low-income people and senior citizens need. So that's not good. And we're going in the wrong direction. I plan to fight that. I am fighting that. But it's not too popular. Secondly, let me talk about Israel and the Middle East. The Obama administration has a very schizophrenic record. Very schizophrenic. On the diplomatic front, with the 67 borderless swaps, with the focus on the settlements, short-sighted, wrong. On the military side, it's been excellent. And they don't talk about, no one talks about the fact that when the Obama administration took office, they thought that the American promise to maintain Israel's qualitative superiority militarily over any potential coalition of enemies was not being observed. So they sharply stepped up military assistance to Israel, sharply stepped up military coordination and intelligence sharing with Israel, and sharply stepped up cooperation on the Iron Dome missile defense system. We voted on 2 special appropriations over and above the normal appropriation for military assistance to Israel to increase it. And the Iron Dome, obviously, is essential. And what Chuck mentioned, is obviously correct. I would like to see, we haven't seen it, but I'd like to see a president specifically criticize the Palestinians when Abbas says he will never agree to a Jewish state. When they say that no Jews may ever live in a Palestinian state. When a Palestinian state, if a Palestinian state is established, there must be no Jews, there must be Yudenrein. When did we last hear about Yudenrein territory? Not the last 60 or 70 years. It's the same mentality. There are Arabs and Palestinians living in Israel. Why cannot there be Jews living in a Palestinian state? If a Palestinian state is I also want to say that one thing, if negotiations ever really get started again, that's a big if at this point. If negotiations ever get started again, and we talk about, the Palestinians talk about the right of return, which obviously cannot happen. You cannot have a Palestinian state and an Israeli state with 6 million people who claim to be descendants of people kicked out or who left in 1948 coming back in, then you have 2 Palestinian states. That has to go away, obviously. But we'll be talking about compensation of Palestinian refugees, and properly so. The international community will come up with compensation. There were about 650,000, give or take 100,000, depending on whose numbers you believe, Palestinians who left what is now Israeli territory. There were about 850,000 Jews kicked out of Arab states between 1946 and 1956. You never hear about them. I passed a resolution in Congress 2 years ago which directed the Secretary of State and the State Department, and it said, if negotiations ever get serious, and if compensation or any other thing is discussed for the Palestinian refugees, then equal compensation must be discussed and put on the table and supported as a condition by the United States government. Equal compensation for Jewish refugees. Now we ought to hear talk about the Jewish refugees so people don't think, it was one-sided, those terrible Jews kicked out the Palestinians. It didn't happen. Iran. There is no greater danger in the world today than Iran. Here is a fanatic government, parts of which believe that a nuclear holocaust would bring the Mashiach, that is to say the fifth Imam. He would return only after a nuclear holocaust. A nuclear holocaust would be a good thing. A good thing. When we had the Cold War with the Soviet Union, they were terrible. But they didn't want a nuclear holocaust. They were willing to risk it, but they didn't want it. They were rational. They didn't want to commit suicide. That's not clear about the government in Tehran. Deterrence only works when you have rational people on the other side who don't want a nuclear war because they know that they will get killed and their country destroyed. If you have people in charge who don't care, you think that maybe that's a good thing because the fifth Imam will return, then deterrence doesn't work. We cannot permit the Iranians to get nuclear weapons no matter what it takes. No matter what it takes. And I must say one thing which may be unpopular. The United States just did, and NATO, the United States and England and France just did something which I think will help make the situation worse. In the United States, or more properly with NATO, with the United States cooperation, overthrew the Gaddafi regime in Libya. What message will we send it, whether we intended to send it or not? Gaddafi is a terrible guy who, since 2003, gave up his nuclear weapons program, brought in the inspectors, and agreed to cooperate, and did cooperate with the United States and others since about 2003. He was a terrible tyrant at home, granted, but he cooperated abroad. We invaded him and overthrew his regime anyway. The message sent, if there's any mullah in Tehran thinking maybe the sanctions are too tough, maybe we really shouldn't get nuclear weapons, maybe, we don't need them so much. We just say, yes, you need them. Yes, you need them. The only insurance you have against NATO or the United States intervening militarily against your regime is nuclear weapons. We don't fool around with North Korea no matter how bad they are because they have nuclear weapons. Gaddafi, terrible guy, but behaving himself abroad, we fooled around with. We just sent the message that you should get nuclear weapons if you want assurance that the Western powers will not overthrow your regime. Very bad message to send. And what it means is that it will be much more difficult for the sanctions to work because they'll be more determined to get nuclear weapons from their view to protect themselves against the potential NATO or American military intervention. And it increases the likelihood that the only thing that will stop them from getting nuclear weapons is Israeli or American nuclear action, American or Israeli military action, which may be necessary and may be more necessary because of what we did. So I think what we did was not a good idea, and it made the situation worse, and it made it more dangerous. And we will have to consider more likely the idea of military intervention, which will come if it comes at a very, very high price. Let no one fool anyone. If the United States or Israel attacks Iran, and it may be necessary to do so, but if that happens, the first result will be 40,000 rockets launched at Israel from Hezbollah and Hamas. And maybe the Iron Dome will work very well, and maybe it won't work so well, but it won't be a good thing. We will pay, Israel will pay a heavy price if we have to attack Iran. but we may have to. And we must not shirk from that possibility. So it's not a pretty situation we're in today, either economically, or in foreign policy, or sakana for Eretz Israel, but I think we have to be honest about where we are, and continue to pray to Hashem.